So,
Never would. I got dropped off. So if I drop off somewhere mid-sentence, please wait for me and I'll try to rejoin. I have a few networks here. I'm certain one of them at least should work.
okay, no worries. So, good morning, evening, and afternoon to everyone from different parts of the world. Today, we are here for our next session. Today, we have Joanna Kulesza. She is the current at large vice chair. She is a professor of international law and faculty at Law and Administration University of Lodz and Poland. So, Joanna, the mic is yours. Please, give your brief introduction and tell our fellows about how you started with ICANN and what are the things that they should do. And if you have any question, please raise your hand and we'll give you the floor. Joanna, mic is with you. So.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, Shredeep. It's always a pleasure to meet you and to meet new colleagues. Thank you guys for joining us on this, what might be your late evening or very early morning. My name is Joanna kulesza. Indeed, I work at the Faculty of Law and Administration. I'm a professor of international law. The University of Lodz is in Poland. And indeed, I have served my 2 terms as the ALAC vice chair. And in this current term, I am a mere GAC liaison, or maybe even a GAC liaison, implying that my job this term is to make sure that the at-large advisory committee representing the end users is well aligned with the objectives that are represented by the governments in the governmental advisory committee. Working on international law, I tend to find that job particularly appealing because on one hand, it allows me to represent the end users, and that was my primary ideological objective for joining the at-large. And on the other hand, it allows me to do my job, which is following how governments deal with all issues related to cyber. Well, the Times prioritize cybersecurity. As already mentioned, being a professor of international law here at the University of Lodz, I also run a research center, which is called the Lodz Cyber Hub. And I mention this because the Lodz Cyber Hub was recently approved as a URALO ALS. And I'm certain Shredeep and my colleagues have already elaborated on that tricky acronym. Thank you, Natalie. That's very nice. I'm not bragging, but I'm trying to show you here what it is that you might do when you do decide to stick around with this lovely, friendly crowd that is ICANN. So the ALS, that is the research center here at the university, is attempting to represent the interests of the community, the discussions that go on at ICANN, which at times can be puzzling and challenging, to students, to the regional community, to people here in Łódź. So we do organize various events with the kind support from both ICANN.org and from my colleagues, volunteers across the globe, working across time zones from different perspectives, from different communities, to make sure that there is a common understanding around an end user position and that we understand what it means to represent the end user perspective. That means basically any aspect of human life online within the community. And I do greet Natalie from Czechia. At least we do share the same time zone, so it's lovely to see you here. I would stop here in terms of an introduction, Shredeep. I don't know if you have an agenda. I did ask broadly. Do kindly note, I work at a university, so when you give me a green light, it's 90 minutes of a monologue that I usually produce. We don't want to go there, so I'm just going to stop and check if you have any questions, or maybe the lovely people who decided to join us might have anything specific as well. Shredeep, if you're speaking, you're on mute.
Yes, so Natalie, she has a hands up.
Yes, hi Shredeep and hello Joanna. Joanna, it's very nice that you're here. Yes, of course, and Czech, I believe it is in Poland. I meant the clapping really seriously because I personally struggle with finding some understanding in the academia community. Why do I want to be involved in ICANN and like in general in internet governance? And I really struggle with that as I'm currently finishing my PhD and I'm also part of a research institute. But for them, they really can't I don't know, maybe not understand, but really see the benefits in doing this type of collaborations. So for me, this is very inspiring to see that somewhere it is working well. And yeah, it was just so nice to hear. So also kudos
Yeah.
for that.
Thank you very much. It is well. You see, there are I think two ways to look at it. I would love to follow up and hear what you're working on. So you mentioned you're working on research. What would be the specific topic that you're engaged in?
Yes, we're an interdisciplinary research team. So we have people from also media background, IT background, and psychology. We are mainly combining psychology and ICT perspective. And in my case, I'm looking at the digital skills of children and adolescents and how does that
Oh,
affect them also from like some, let's say, psychological perspective. So we're trying to also measure well-being and if what they do online, what they see, how does that affect them. So in my view, we also sometimes touch topics like regulation and whether this is the right thing to do. And this has a lot in common with what we are discussing on the internet governance level. So this is
yeah,
just an example
absolutely.
where I really see some, yeah, meaningful connections.
Yeah, great. Is this a university or is it a research center? Because my
Uh,
follow up is going to be a bit different depending on that.
yeah. We're like combined. Let's say we are independent institution, but under like the university umbrella. So sometimes we have some
Right.
duties with the university, but we're also independent in terms of finances. Let's say.
Yeah, I think there is an added value here. So when you mention child security online, Shrideep would know this, and you guys have probably already been introduced to the topic of DNS abuse, which sounds very technical. That's what I always say, but it's not, right? Because DNS abuse basically to policy people means cybercrime, and cybercrime is regulated. There is no way around it. So, regardless of how the community wishes to cut it for policy development purposes, when it comes down to phishing, when it comes down to botnets, sorry, we have laws on these things. So, if you do work on child security, one of the crucial components of any DNS abuse campaign is child protection online, child abusive and sexual materials, which should just not be carried by any provider, whatever your job is, that kind of the category of content, even though ICANN doesn't deal with content and there's the picket fence, child abusive and sexual material is out of the question. So I would argue that you would be very well positioned to hold that conversation on both ends. That is my experience. Bringing the policy development experience, bringing an understanding of how this actually works on the ground is invaluable to any kind of a policy related discussion. So if you work for a research center that actually wants to make change on the ground, which is an idea I feel very close to myself. So if you actually want to make a change rather than just write abstract papers on methodologies, the ICANN experience is very useful in that sense because you literally meet face to face people who face child abusive and sexual materials online every day and have to make those difficult decisions. So, from the policy angle, it's invaluable. And on the other hand, when you would be to have a methodological discussion on what is child behavior online, what's safe, what is not safe, etc., you can always come up with a very pragmatic response or input and say, all right, we can talk about distinctions and definitions, but what it comes down to is what our friends at PIR have just come up with regards to flagging content that no one wants to see online. So I think it's an interesting position to combine the ideology with the very pragmatical input into whatever area of life you would like to see improved. But yes, I am an idealist, as you might have already observed. So I will let those among you who are more pragmatic take that with a grain of salt. Srideep, I saw you trying to chime in there, sir. Please go right ahead.
Oh no, I was just trying to motivate other people as well to speak and to share and to introduce as well, because it's a golden opportunity that you are here and then you are the vice and they can learn like so much because this community, as you rightly mentioned, it looks technical but it is not. The technical side is there, but a lot of the part is more related to the policy making, which is very clear. I mean to say, it's what we go through, right? It's what happens in Nepal. It's what happens in different parts of the world, and where we bring in the issues, and then how policies are shaped up. It's not a complicated thing. So please, if you have any question, if you want to just like introduce, tell her the work that you do, please, the mic is yours.
Yeah, it's not the same as the real thing. I apologize. I will not be there on the ground in Puerto Rico, but I always miss the opportunity to meet people face to face, and this is as close as we can get in that inter-meeting period. So if anyone would like to share their perspective, thank you so much for chiming in there, Natalie. I would love to hear more from you. If that's not the case, I'll just show you what we do around here. So there's, for example, in terms of how the policy, the technical policy that Shrideep mentioned meets, I don't know, headlines that you would see in the media. This is a piece that a colleague of mine and myself just published for a European think tank, which is the European Union Institute for Security Studies. And they have a targeted agenda on cyber diplomacy. So, not very technical, but cyber diplomacy comes down to what is carried by intermediaries. And when you come in with an internet governance perspective, that is usually quite useful. So what Berna and myself just published, and we did hold a dedicated session during the meeting in Hamburg. That was an open session. Atlarge hosted it because we represent the end users. But we enjoyed very good presence, both from the org, including Octo reps, and the GAC, and clearly the commercial stakeholders as well. So we're looking at infrastructures. In this case, as you can see, we're looking at the conflict in Gaza, the war in Gaza, and the role that SpaceX might play. Now, you could say, well, where does ICANN come in? Well, ICANN is all about infrastructures. It is DNS, but DNS is on top of infrastructures that in this case belong to a lovely American gentleman. Now, the question is whether he would be free to decide to provide infrastructure in that conflict zone. Should it be left to the governments? If so, is there a voice of end users that could be heard? Where would we facilitate that voice? Where would we make it heard to change the scenario to whatever we would find appropriate? So wherever you look, whichever headline you see that has to do with cyber, I'm based in Poland, the headlines here usually point to cyber war in Ukraine. The universal headlines around the globe have sort of been monopolized by the conflict in Gaza, but the theme is the same. It is cybersecurity. And when you do talk about cybersecurity, you talk about infrastructures, you talk about connectivity, and you talk about DNS abuse that specifies individual malicious activities that can or cannot, should or should not be carried online. I'm certain you've heard this when the war in Ukraine broke out. Ukraine addressed the board, the CEO of ICANN, requesting for the CCTLD for Russia, the .ru, to be taken down, to be deleted, or at least suspended in the DNS, because Russia violated international law, committed an act of aggression. Many service providers decided to withdraw from Russia. I'm certain you've seen that. And ICANN, the community as well, we had these discussions also here in Europe, in Urelo, whether ICANN should make a decision and decide that because a state is recognized, that's an open question as well there, as an aggressor in international settings, should it be sanctioned in that way? Does the community, because all of the policies are community driven, does the community hold an authority to make that decision? And if it does, should it make that decision? Because if we decide to suspend or delete .ru from the DNS as a sanction, do we do the same for every conflict? I will let you choose your preferred conflict that's going on around the globe, and I will let you choose the side you would like to see punished in that way. Is this something we should do? Is this a power that the community holds? So even if you look at these questions, it's very technical, very pragmatic, there are broader policy questions. And I also appreciate what Natalie said in terms of governance. We tend to think about, again, child security online, child safety online, as a national legislation issue. Great, DNS abuse is clearly out there. We do see these discussions becoming siloed. We talk about splinternet scenarios. I know that's something that Shrideep has also raised in our discussions previously. So we see no longer one world, meaning one internet. States and organizations, regions are becoming more isolated. But in 2024, there still is one DNS, and ICANN still stands for one world, one internet. You could say that's very I don't know, 1970s thinking of the DNS being developed and set up. But that's still the case. We still have one domain name system. Clearly, there are solutions like RUNET, like the Chinese firewall, like right now here in Europe, we have DNS for EU that are looking to reroute the traffic to keep certain communities safe from external threats. Really interesting politically, but at the same time, very technical. And ICANN offers you a lens through which you can look at those specific problems. There are reports from Octo, our security and technical guys and girls, that will help you better understand what it means that Europe wants its own DNS, its own internet. What does that mean? Can they build a different DNS? Do they start from scratch? Maybe you're doing Bitcoins. I know some people do. So Bitcoins operate in those, one would think, separate networks. Is it the same? Is it different? Is it safe? Is it just as safe as the one world, one internet that ICANN works on? I managed to encourage one of our good friends and colleagues, Mr. Alan Woods, who's working for one of the DNS services providers, I should say. Clean DNS is called, a relatively new company that literally works on getting the undesired stuff offline. And he joined my students here at the University of Lodz, and we had a really interesting discussion where one of the students asked, well, okay, if I want to mine Bitcoins in one of those separate net, is it safe? Is it part of the internet? Who runs it? So if you're interested in any of those aspects of cyber, broadly speaking, doesn't have to be cybersecurity, could be cyber diplomacy. I'll show you another thing we're doing here as an ALS. Hang on, I have tabs, so I'll just share those with you. As in ICANN ALS, we are hosting as the Lodz Cyber Hub a training on international law and cybersecurity for the European college that deals with cybersecurity, usually the ESTC. You can see the details right there, European Security and Defense College. So it's a dedicated training for European cyber diplomats to give them the tools to better understand what is happening in cyberspace. We will be hosting an intervention from our friends at ICANN.org. Ms. Helena Plexida will be speaking on internet governance related issues. So whatever you do, however you might be engaged into cyber, having that root zone understanding or having friends who can help you bring that message across, like Alan did for my students, is always an added value. Now, I should probably also talk about the challenges, shouldn't I, Shrideep? Because I'm painting a rosy picture here. Everyone's merrily singing around the bonfire at ICANN.
Sure.
I'm going to stop again and see if we have feedback here. Do you guys have questions or comments? Fragmentation, Bitcoins. I haven't talked about games yet. We usually have at least a few gamers in any setting. Any questions or comments?
I do have a question. It's more about the fragmentation of the internet. Maybe it's, well, not exactly off topic, but there's also, I've heard you say that the argument that it's very like unified, maybe because there's the argument that the automated systems speak the same language, quote unquote, like the IP protocol language. So what would you say to the argument that sometimes given that people think that the internet is inherently fragmented because it is a mesh of networks that is connected to each other?
So the question is whether I view the internet as fragmented. Is that the question? The gist of the question, is that right, Elisa?
Yes.
Well, I would probably not be at ICANN if I saw it that way. So the argument I was making, as you probably rightfully recognized, is to the contrary. There still is one world, one internet, because you and I, regardless of where you are, can still communicate. And that communication is undisrupted, at least at the fundamental level we're trying to protect within the ICANN community. So for now, I don't have to dial up a different network, possibly one that would be monitored to reach you. Now, we could talk about geolocalization and geo-blocking. We could talk about blackouts, right? And all of those issues are part of the conversation we might wish to have here at ICANN. But I would still view the internet as the domain name system. There's one domain name system. So if I want to have my name, kulesza, represented online in one of the TLDs, there's just going to be one number, one location that will be assigned to that specific place that I want to host in cyber. For example, the hub, right? So the hub does have a location within the university, and that is just one number that you guys can call up and see the content that we do. I see a hand from Chrislyn. Sridip, is it okay if I moderate myself here, or
Sure,
do you
sure. No
want to
worries, no
jump
worries.
in?
Please, please, please.
So I would be eager to give Christian the floor, but I also want to check if Aliza has any feedback, because I might have just shot right next to the question that you were trying to pose there. Aliza?
No, absolutely. No, thank you for your answer. That really, it gives me a good understanding of the way you look at it. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Chrislyn?
Yes, sorry I got bumped up for a bit, so I may have missed a little bit of the discussion. But I wanted to chime in on the cybersecurity aspect that you were talking about. That is a topic that I'm really excited about. But sometimes in our scope, we don't normally take the entire globe into consideration. And when you were talking a while ago and you mentioned how ICANN, the community of ICANN can help to intervene in the war, that just shows the power of the community. And that is I believe for people like me, that's a good place to start. Just trying to become a part of that community where you can broaden your scope and not just viewing cybersecurity in your own company or in your own country, but as one internet. That's what I wanted to say.
Yeah, absolutely. I would probably immediately respond to that by saying, you may look at your internet or your local community through that specific lens, but then you will effectively be regulated by ICANN's policies, because if our friends decide that a specific category of content at the end of the day, like those violating intellectual property rights, are abusive to the domain name system, we will universally not be able to access that, or you will not be able universally to carry that. So at some point, international laws are wonderful. That's my home, and I feel very strongly about it. But it comes down to the day-to-day operation of registries and registrars, and they have to abide by ICANN rules. Now, we can go on into that rabbit hole, if you will, of regulation. I'm certain you are aware of the acronym that's called GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation. Europeans, in Brussels particularly, are very proud of it. We talk about the Brussels effect, the spillover effect. We've regulated data privacy universally. Well, the rest of the world does not always share that excitement. And probably GDPR was that breaking point where we saw regulation literally shape ICANN's policies. If you do come to the meetings, if you try to follow that narrative, we still have ongoing discussions. Who should have access to which data and what personal data actually means in the ICANN setting. So there is this interesting, at least to me, line between regulation and ICANN policies that comes down to day-to-day decisions on specific content. But I should probably also show you the darker side of getting involved with ICANN. Sridip knows this all too well. If you do want to follow these discussions, particularly from an end user perspective, this comes at a relatively high time cost. So if you do want to dive deeper into these policies, this comes with a heavy burden in calls and meetings. I'm very excited for you guys to be joining the Puerto Rico meeting. I know it's going to be great. The people always are the brightest point in the lengthy, sometimes, policy development processes, but it is quite time consuming. So if you do it as a hobby, as Sridip and I do, it's a time consuming hobby to have. But on the other hand, if you're, for example, new to the field and you're looking for a really exciting job, everyone that does internet governance also as a job comes to ICANN meetings. So if you're a young person just out of school and you're trying to find a place maybe to develop your skills or offer them to a good employer, ICANN is the perfect place. I'm again being optimistic, aren't I, Sridip? I was trying to highlight that you will probably face challenges regarding the different time zones and the calls and the meetings and people talking in acronyms. And this can be very overwhelming. But at the end of the day, I tend to find that quite rewarding for the reasons that I've elaborated on. Sridip, please go ahead.
Yes, I mean to say, yeah, that's the perk to it. That is the reason why I've been telling them, be very resourceful, use the resources that are available. Like schedule is there, come prepared. Like have your sessions shorted, whatever your interest. Don't dive into the I can hemisphere like this, or else like you will be bombarded with mails. So like go into your interest, start developing the thing about what you're interested, passionate about, and then you slowly go on and then move on to a bigger aspect to it. And then they have been doing a great job. I mean to say, so things are going quite well for them. Few of them are first timers, so others are not newcomers, so they also have the idea about what to do, what not to do. But as you rightly said, it's all about what interests you and how you're going to make a use out of it. Because if you want, you can make a professional use, you can learn, you can increase your professional skills, you can add up something as knowledge as well as skills. If not, then like there is nothing to it. Like it will just be a event. So I think there is more to learning to it, and to do some preparations as well. So
True, true, true. You can easily use this as a launch pad for your career. But I can guarantee one thing: you will make friends. So if you
yes.
go there and you think, I don't want to talk to you will make friends. But speaking of which, I'm going to leave my details here. I presume you guys might be on LinkedIn. So there you go, and you will find all the contact details. Consider this a friendship offer. And if you have any follow-ups that might come up later, do feel free to reach out. Um, I don't think I have anything specific, Shrideep, that I feel would be useful at this point. So I'm glad to hand the floor over back to you and check if we have any replies from our participants or anything specific you would like me to address. I'm glad to get everyone involved in the Consolidated Policy Working Group
Right.
that meets weekly. I'm sure you've been saying that already. So if you guys want to sort of test the depth of the water within at large, then the policy meetings that happen every week are definitely a good place to start.
So please, if you have more questions, anything, we just have 15 more minutes. She has a time scheduled, so we just have 15 more minutes. So if you have anything to ask about, yeah, Christine.
Yes, just a quick question. I'm curious as to how long would ICANN allow the community to have discussions on a particular topic before it moves on to the stage where they start seriously considering it for decision making?
Mm-hmm. Very good question. Uh, I know that my more experienced colleagues would laugh out loud, and I'm not going to do that. I would just simply say there isn't such a time limit. We've talked for quite a while to have expedited processes where expedited would mean a certain amount of time, and the community has not really been very successful. I'm glad for you to differ there with me, Shrideep. But from where I'm sitting, we started talking about personal data about 20 years ago. The GDPR came into force in 2018, that's 6 years. And 2018 was the moment where ICANN needed legally to have a process for accessing data. And that's still ongoing. And the work started 5 years prior to that, the actual policy work. So I would say there isn't a time limit on this, which makes your participation at ICANN even more time consuming. There are on the other side, which is challenging for the end user community. On the other side, you would have people who do this as a job, right? So their job is to make sure that the policy that is developed suits the interests of their company or maybe their government. Sometimes it's also suitable for those interests not to have a policy in place, because if you don't have a policy, there's more flexibility, particularly in the business environment. So we don't really have a timeline. We always try to make things happen very quickly, but because the process is complex, spans across time zones, communities, cultures, languages, the at large in that sense is very welcoming. We usually have real-time interpretation for all of our meetings, but not everyone does. The work happens in small working groups that convene regularly, but out of schedule of the large meetings for specific constituencies. So it is a challenging process. I get that, but at the same time, that impacts the duration of the call. So not very good question, not an easy answer, or maybe an easy one, but not a very optimistic one. Did I manage to address that? Christine, was that an answer to your question?
Yes, it was. Thank you very much.
Yeah, very long answer to a very short question, but that's where we stand, I'm afraid. Anyone else? I
Okay.
appreciate the gender imbalance here. Thank you very much. I see a hand raised by a gentleman, I believe. Sir, please go ahead. Nirupam?
Yes. Hello, Joanna. It's evening here. So I actually have a curiosity regarding cybersecurity and the laws and the policies. It's related with a recent incident that happened in Nepal, where a young guy was caught selling illegal substances using the social media platforms like Instagram, Facebook, and we got to know that he was operating for like 2 3 years already, and the local police uh, it clearly took like 2 3 years to find out his operations, how he was operating, and eventually caught him. So what uh, are the policies, and how ICANN is interacting with the local police and the local cybersecurity organization to address this problem, where they could have easily intercepted the maybe the data involving the illegal substances, uh, interchanging and business. So, what might be the policy making processes, and what is ICANN actually doing for this now? So, is there anything I could know
Yeah.
about this? Thank you very much.
Great question. Thank you very much. So there are two components to my answer. On the one hand, I'm going to repeat myself and speak about DNS abuse, where certain content, very specific, but certain content and certain activity would be considered disabled from being carried by the registries and the registrars. So that discussion around criminality and illegal behavior would be focused under the hashtag, if you will, DNS abuse, so abuse of the domain name system. But that's not specifically the answer. If you're interested in cybersecurity or cybercrime, follow all of the DNS abuse discussions. But more specifically, there is a link between the local police and ICANN, like you rightfully mentioned. If we want to have an IP number or see the traffic that goes here and there, we might want to reach out to the registries and registrars. This usually happens nationally. So if it's a national police officer who wants to access data on traffic within the jurisdiction of a country, we don't really need ICANN to get involved. But if you would like to meet police officers, including FBI officers, at an ICANN meeting, come to the meeting of this working group. This is the Public Safety Working Group within the Governmental Advisory Committee. Now, the Governmental Advisory Committee, as the name has it, represents governments. It is particularly interested in keeping the citizens safe. So we would assume, that assumption would be correct, that if the government send police officers to an ICANN meeting to try and better understand how to counter online crime, they would be meeting with the GAC, and that's perfectly true. When you do plan your agenda for Puerto Rico, consider adding a visit to the GAC room. The GAC is quite numerous. They do have a dedicated location at every ICANN meeting. I happen to find those meetings, those dedicated themes that the GAC discusses particularly interesting, also from the end user perspective, because the whole point is for us to align the governments and the citizens, the individuals. So GAC has a public safety working group, which again might sound ambiguous, but that's exactly what is being discussed there. That's cybercrime. Cybercrime would be the focus of those discussions from the DNS abuse perspective, clearly, but also whenever you talk to anyone within the public safety working group, they will explicitly say we always work very closely with police officers on the ground. There is a link to GDPR that I already mentioned. You guys might be aware that ICANN hosted Whois, the Whois database, where the police officers would be able to look up details of anyone who registered a domain name within a specific domain. The GDPR made Whois go black, so we no longer have that universally accessible database, but there's a new system in place where the police can sign up to receive information. That's the RDOP initially, now it's called redress. So whenever you hear those buzzwords, follow up on them. And that's where ICANN can support local law enforcement in identifying the culprit behind a specific crime. But if we were to look at platforms, that's a bit of a different deal. So platforms, so you would meet, for example, Facebook reps at an ICANN meeting, but platforms are not really directly involved in that conversation. So if you want to discuss that issue of cybercrime, cybersecurity with a registry or registrar, ICANN is the place to go. But if you would like to talk to Mark Zuckerberg about what he's doing to keep the kids safe online, that might be a bit of a different conversation. I'm just going to check if that was in any way helpful. Nirupam, anything to follow up?
Yes, it was. I got to know so many things. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else? I would love to hear from you guys what it is that you do. I heard from a few of you, but if you would like to share what it is that you do and what brings you to ICANN, I know you have probably done this already because you guys know each other, but I don't, and I'm a sucker for making new friends. Anyone?
Yeah, please go on. Yeah, Kathleen. Yeah, sure.
Kathleen. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kathleen. I'm from the United States. I work also at a university in their tech law program in their law school, doing a mix of program admin and research actually on children's online safety, oddly enough. Crazy to have a few people in what feels like such a niche world. But I had a question in regards to sort of representation at the at-large in general. So I know that ICANN, for example, in what you talked about before, decided not to take down .ru or Russian domain names and made that decision. How does ICANN, specifically the at-large, regulate membership at all? And what does that process sort of look like?
Very good question. Thank you. I'm glad to elaborate on that. I'll try to give you a brief answer and then please let me know if that was helpful or not. I did mention that the research center that I host here at the University of Lodz is an ALS, which is an at-large structure. The at-large is unique in that way. There's a history behind it, which I'm going to refrain from briefly describing. But if you would like to join the at-large, we operate through ALSs, at-large structures. It could be an NGO, it could be a research center like here, it could be a company. Usually it's societies, foundations. Originally, these were ISOC chapters. So ISOC chapters would be represented and their members would come to an ICANN meeting and they would make those decisions and they would chime in and discuss. There is a formal approval process. So if I wanted the hub to be an ALS, I had to apply in my region, which happens to be Rallo. I would need to present my interests. There is a due diligence that ICANN.org does. So if the research center at the University of Lodz was, I don't know, funded by a terrorist organization, we really have to rely on public funding. But if we were funded by any kind of an institution with low credibility, anything would prove to the ICANN.org due diligence team as suspicious, that would be flagged. That would be shared with the Rallo board, which would then make a decision. And that decision then means that either the individual organization will be approved as an ALS or not. So we do have internal processes. They do include transparency. All of the information also about the hub, I'll share it just for reference, is published on the website, on your Rallo website. There is probably more of an issue about mobilizing the ALSs. So not so much about someone sort of spoiling the process from the at-large side and joining to impact the policies in a specific manner, but rather there is an issue about mobilizing the ALSs and the question of legitimacy. How do we decide what is the critical mass of end users that should have a say within at-large and beyond? So we operate through ALSs, but if you're an individual, every region has a dedicated at-large structure for individuals. That's how I started. So I first joined the URALO Individuals Association, kindly hosted by a good friend and colleague, Roberto Gaetano, in Italy. So he registered that specific society in his own capacity. And if you want to join the at-large, you can join through that in Europe. I believe in North America, there is individual participation. So you can just join NARALO as an individual, and every region has their own policy to decide how that is executed. Is that helpful? I can go into more details. I'm not trying to make a sales pitch here, but rather sort of opt for transparency. Was that helpful, Kathleen? Or is there anything I missed?
Yeah, it was. I guess I sort of understand from the Neuralo perspective and the work I've done with them, but I guess how that differs regionally in terms of, like, I understand how Neuralo makes decisions about individual membership, but how that operates or differs in different regions is very interesting to me. But yes, it answered my initial question for sure.
Great. Thank you. There is always a concern about transparency, you know, but that comes with every large organization, and we try to be as transparent as we can. We have 1 more minute, and I see a hand from Chrislyn. Chrislyn, please go right ahead. Thank you for raising your hand.
Yes. With regards to the icon whois database, right? I'm speaking from an end user point of view, where I wanna sometimes when you're dealing with providers, you will put in your correct information for the whois database regarding to for the domain name. However, when I actually check the icon whois database, then I wouldn't see my information. I would see the information for the provider, right? So I was kind of curious as when you were answering Nirupan's question, you know, in terms of how security goes on investigation, because then here you are looking at the whois database, but you're not actually seeing the information for the person who owns that domain.
Absolutely. So that's the question of privacy proxies, right? And I believe the problem or the challenge there is as old as the DNS and icon itself. There always has been the question of balancing privacy and transparency. Privacy proxies operate exactly in that region, and I don't think we have a good solution. Even the conversations you will see about redress, so the new system that is supposed to be installed, still flags the question of privacy proxies. The community is working on it. That's the best answer I can give you there. You're perfectly correct to say that we would expect the data of the registrant, whereas it's a company that probably likely has the name privacy in its logo and its trademark. That offers a service for those who do not want to be found online. Law enforcement colleagues usually indicate that that is also a lead. So if you have 50 domain names registered to the same privacy proxy, then that's probably a lead that will point you to a criminal network, and all of those domain names would likely need to be blocked. So there is a way to use that to the benefit of security and privacy online, but it is a challenge, and I believe it's going to remain a challenge. If any of you have any other thoughts or insights, I'm always glad to hear that. I also note that probably Shrideep will want to wrap us up, so I'm glad to hand you over the floor again, Shrideep. Thank you again for having me today.
Thank you, Joanna, and you've already provided your contact information. So if you have anything, please send it to her. She's a very friendly person, and the way you have laid it out is like very simple, very clearly. Everything is like crystal clear now. So please, thank you all for joining in, and thank you, Joanna, for being here and speaking out to the fellows. So thank you all. I'll officially like to end the call. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. Good luck, guys, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing you around ICANN. Thank you.